Now, this morning, US President Donald Trump took his campaign to North Carolina, another battleground state. At a campaign rally, the president continued his attacks against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, his running mate. He also hit back at an article in The Atlantic, which has dominated the US political landscape this week. It claimed the president allegedly called military personnel losers and suckers.
No, they make this stuff up. They make it up. They make stuff. It's called disinformation. They give a phony deal out. They did it 2 days ago with the military. There's nobody loves the military more than me. So they make, you know, I was very lucky, though. I had 15 incredible American patriots that came by, and they said, he never said that. They were there. They were there. But they make up stories, horrible stories.
For more on that story, I spoke to Mark Watson, former senior national security executive at the Australian Embassy in Washington. He's now the national security advisor for Bondi Partners. Mark Watson, as always, thanks so much for your time. What do you make of the claims against Donald Trump in that Atlantic magazine? Do the claims, you know, are they credible? And if so, how damaging has it been for the Trump campaign ahead of the election?
I think they're very damaging, there's no doubt. I mean, the sorts of claims, the sorts of allegations that have been made, it'd be hard to think of some more egregious slanders against a sitting president, who is, of course, also the head of the Defence Forces, and he's the Commander-in-Chief of the US military. I think all Australians would understand the respect that Americans have for their men and women in uniform, particularly those who've served in foreign wars, and even more so for those servicemen and women who have given what Abraham Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion. So to say that the president denigrated the service of men and women in Vietnam, and remember nearly 3 million Americans served in Vietnam, and then to go on and say that he also made comments about the fallen in France. It's incredibly serious. It would be taken very badly in veterans communities and in amongst serving military. We don't know if these allegations are true. And frankly, at this stage of the campaign, it really doesn't matter if they're true. What matters is, do the voters believe that they're true? The veterans vote in America is huge. There's 18 to 20 million veterans living in America, plus 1.5 million men and women in uniform. If you add to that parents, partners, children of older servicemen and women who can vote, that is a large section of the voting public in America. So claims like this really could make a difference, particularly in knife-edge states like Florida, which has a very high percentage of veterans living there.
And the fact is the president's denied them vehemently, the claims, but if only a small percentage of that huge voting cohort believes the claims, then that's not great for his re-election bid. What's the way that the veteran community traditionally sways in electoral terms? Which way do they vote?
Well, in the 2016 election, exit polls suggested that the vote split 2-1 in favour of Donald Trump. With all due respect to Secretary Clinton, I think that figure's a little misleading because there may have been a little bit of an anti-Clinton vote as well as a pro-Trump vote there. But nonetheless, taken as en masse, you would say that they tend to split Republican. Interestingly, older veterans, those who served in Vietnam War and earlier, tend to vote Democrat, but more recent veterans, those from the Gulf War era, Iraq, Afghanistan, and current serving members, tend to be quite strongly Republican. But as I say, these sorts of claims, if they're believed by those voters, I have no doubt will change their attitude towards Donald Trump. Whether that changes their vote in the election, well, we'll need to wait till November to see.
And one of the things that we always have to factor in with the US election is whether they show up. That's the key thing, isn't it, in terms of both the major parties, is to get their turnout levels high.
Absolutely right. And any story like this that may tend to reduce enthusiasm for the president and leads to fewer people turning out is just as bad as motivating others to turn out and vote for the opposition. I think it's worth noting that both parties in a campaign like this will have done opposition research. They will have done research to identify stories that they could drop at critical points in the campaign to either damage their opponents or to divert them from their preferred course. Joe Biden and his campaign, I think, had a pretty ordinary week last week. I think he looked shaky in front of camera. I think that the Democrats didn't grip up this law and order issue quickly enough, and they didn't respond strongly enough to the violence and unrest. And lo and behold, in the wake of a bad week, this article drops in the Atlantic. And suddenly, for the first time in this campaign, we see Donald Trump on the back foot. He's been pulled off his preferred battleground, which is law and order, and he had to go into damage control mode over the weekend in Washington.
Because normally the president is very good at driving the news agenda, whether it be via Twitter or his comments. He's always dictating what the conversation's about. But on this occasion, he was unable to. How does that feed into the post-convention landscape? Because they say, I spoke to Simon Jackman from the US Study Centre, who described it as the post-Labor Day sprint to the election now. It's seen as, you know, the final stretch.
That's correct, and I think the president would have been encouraged by some polls that showed in battleground states the margins were tightening after the conventions, not necessarily completely clear-cut, but certainly tightening. That would have given some encouragement. But this, as I say, has knocked the president off his preferred terrain, which is law and order, painting the Democrats as soft on law and order and civil unrest, and he's had to take the very unusual step on a Labor Day long weekend of holding a press conference at the White House to really try and get this thing back on track.
Finally, before you go, I want to get your thoughts on the return of two Australian journalists. The relationship with China is at a very low point. Is there any clear way you can see that the government, that the bilateral relationship might get back onto an even keel right now, given how bad things are?
Yeah, there's no doubt that right now our relationship with China is probably as bad as it's been in the last 10 plus years. The Chinese are very adept at just dialing up the pressure incrementally on countries like Australia and using the state security apparatus to really send a message, a warning, not just to countries like Australia, but also to other journalists and to activists who don't toe the party line. The Chinese have a saying, "Sha ji ge ho kan," which means kill a chicken to show the monkey. Unfortunately, I think that's sort of a demonstration of consequences for people who don't toe the party line is part and parcel of being in China if you're a journalist. At this point in time, I really can't see the way out. When you're in the middle of something like this, it's hard to see what the point is that enables a reset. And of course, that's very troubling for the government and for our relationship with China.
Mark Watson, thanks as always.
Thanks, Kieran.